Good words of advice. Follow me. You ever seen them shirts that says, don't follow me, I don't know where I'm going? You know, I think the t-shirt Jesus was to wear one, he'd say, follow me, I know where I'm going. Good evening. Good to have you back with us for the first time. Some of you may be out for the first time today. Were you nervous to get out this morning? Was there anything, a little worried? No, some of y'all weren't worried? Okay. Just rest assured, Mark's Grocery will be opening soon, okay? And I've got some good prices, especially on toilet paper. Yeah. It's only going to be $10 a roll, okay? And I'm doing that for you guys because we're close. Okay, we're close, so I'm going to give you all the best price for that. All right.
I have a cousin that has bought 2 cases of toilet paper. She's willing to trade it in on a 2-story home.
Oh, 2-story home. That's what the price is running these days, isn't it, right? Yeah. From what I've seen on TV, it sure looks like it, doesn't it, a little bit? All right, so good to have you with us. We are going to go ahead and pick up the songs that touch the heart and soul tonight. You got your books with you there. I have a different type of approach to our song tonight. But before I do it, let's go ahead and look at the song. Kind of whet your appetite there. It's on page 976. 976. Go tell it on the mountain. Y'all heard of this one before? Okay. Should be fairly familiar. It's been around for quite a while. To be honest, there are different words in different songbooks. Did you know that for this song? And I'm going to talk about why about that in a little bit, but if you were to open up another songbook, you might see some slightly different words. And of course, the question would be, well, isn't that a copyright infringement? We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So first of all, let's sing just the first verse to whet our appetite, and then I'll share some background on this song as we're trying to do in this series to help appreciate even more the songs that many of us have sung perhaps countless times, or even introduce new songs and what brought those songs to life so that we can sing them with more of a heart that's connected to the actual meaning. Here we go. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The shepherds all were watching while seated on the ground. A light from that descended and glory shone around. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. Well, I could just sing that song over and over. I love that song. About the spirit of it. Do you know where this song comes from? Actually, I didn't either until I started this series. And this past week, this song, I had to dig a little deeper than I have for some of the other songs, because actually, we don't know exactly who created this song, as far as in one person. But we do know where it came from. This is an African-American spiritual. African-American spiritual. You may or may not have known that. So tonight, what I'm hoping to do is to share with you a little background on many of the songs that we sing that come from that context. And as you are very aware in this country, my wife, who didn't grow up here and is not as aware, but she's learning more about it, we had a time in our country, as we're all aware of, when a part of our countrymen and women, unfortunately, were enslaved. And there were many evils wrought in the sight of that unfortunate and very destructive type of, how shall we say, approach to handling life by certain groups of people in our society. With that said, if I could say that there was one positive thing that might have come out of that, and we've heard this right through a lot of these other songs, that through all that pain and suffering, some really great songs that now many of us sing and we're not even aware of the background of those songs. So what I'm hoping tonight is to share with you a little bit on that background, some of it you may know or may not know, as we develop an appreciation for these songs and as we sing them, hopefully they will resonate even more understanding where they came from. Velma Maya Thomas once said this: "My people," she's an African American, "told stories from Genesis to Revelation, with God's faithful as the main characters. They knew about Adam and Eve in the garden, about Moses and the Red Sea. They sang of the Hebrew children and Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. They could tell you about Mary, Jesus, God, and the devil. If you stood around long enough, you'd hear a song about the blind man seeing, God troubling the water, Ezekiel seeing a wheel, Jesus being crucified and raised from the dead. If slaves couldn't read the Bible, they would memorize biblical stories they heard and translate them into songs." Isn't that neat? Right? Many of this group of people, as slaves, they weren't allowed to read, or they weren't given the opportunity to learn how to read. So how did they take their experience if they couldn't put it down on paper? For the past few weeks, as we looked into this series, we had people who could write, who could record, or somebody would do that for him, as in the case of the man who was blind we just read about recently. But they had the ability to somehow put that down on paper. This group of people had to actually create songs and carry them down through hundreds of years of slavery in order for those to be passed on eventually to someone who would record them. I'd like to share that with you a little bit. These songs were used to communicate with one another without the knowledge, sometimes, of the people that they were around. This was particularly the case when a slave was planning to escape bondage and to seek freedom via the Underground Railroad. Spirituals were created extemporaneously. Right, there's a fancy word, right? That means they just came to life on their own. They weren't necessarily planned out and written with notes. They were repeated phrases that came from the heart and the experience of the people who had that. And they were passed orally from person to person. These folk songs were improvised as suited the singers. You know how many of these there are approximately? 6,000. 6,000 spirituals or sorrow songs. However, the oral tradition of the slaves' ancestors and the prohibition against slaves learning to read or write meant that the actual numbers of these songs is probably unknown. But perhaps you know some of these songs. Let me call some of these out that are actually known as African American spirituals. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Still away. And here's one of my favorites. Swing low, swing chariot. Go down, Moses. He's got the whole world in his hand. You didn't know that, did you? The child song that we sing, that comes from the African American experience. How about this newer one that we sing? Every time I feel the Spirit. And here's a couple I don't know of, but I hope to learn sometime. Let us break bread together on our knees and wade in the water. Oh, somebody else knows that one. All right. Some beautiful songs. And again, we're not here tonight to make anyone uncomfortable. You know, I've always thought it's important to engage with the truth. Okay? As a young man, some of you have heard my experience of growing up with my own suffering with my handicap. And there was a long time that I ran from the truth of where my anger and my animosity towards people came from. And it wasn't until I confronted what the source of that was that I could finally be at peace with myself. And from that experience now, I think has made me a better man. So I'm well aware that I'm speaking to an audience that's multiracial tonight. And this is probably too sensitive of a topic to talk to perhaps many groups in our culture. But I think that my church is different. Amen. I think my church recognizes that we should appreciate all sources of backgrounds of people. Amen. My wife is Japanese. Many of you have gotten to know more about the Japanese culture as We've had a Japanese preacher here, you remember a couple of years ago. Actually, the man that taught my wife, his name was Ataka-san. We had one of the missionaries that came a few years ago, Mr. Ray. Unfortunately, he just passed away a few months ago. And of course, Miami's parents came over a couple times since we've been here, and my children have had a great experience here. So you've learned, and I hope you have appreciated a little bit more about where the Japanese have been and where they've come from by the opportunity of learning that from my wife. Well, in a similar way, I'm wondering if, because we're so uncomfortable with what happened with our African American brethren, that sometimes we run from the truth because we're afraid of engaging with it. And I'm not saying that that's the same for everybody. I'm sure some of us are trying to do that. But I think on some levels, many of us in this culture refuse or are embarrassed, shall I say, to walk up to that experience and to open your arms and say, there is something here for me in that also. Amen. So I'm hoping tonight to bring that even closer to you if you haven't had that experience yet. Look at the bottom of this page and you will not see the name of this man. Oh, excuse me. Before I do that, I wanted to share Isaiah 42. Sorry. If you'll look under the title of the song, Isaiah 42, 10 through 12, I'll go ahead and put the verses up here for you. This, go tell it on the mountain, where does that phrase come from? There's a verse here in Isaiah 42 that's in the middle of these three I'm going to show you. I'll just read the whole context. Isaiah says, sing to the Lord a new song, yes, and his praise from the ends of the earth. You who go down to the sea and all that is in it, you coastlands and you inhabitants of them. Let the wilderness and its cities lift up their voice, the villages that Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise in the coastlands. Amen. What a great go tell it on the mountain. Isaiah 42. I think Isaiah was one of those guys, didn't he? Isn't he a prophet that prophesied about somebody coming into the world about 700 years before that happened? I wonder what he was talking about when he said, go tell it on the mountain. So I want us to appreciate the meaning of these songs, and here is a guy that you probably don't know very well. And again, my point tonight is not to lift these people up into sainthood. I just want you to understand the context of where these people came from. And in this man's case, there isn't a lot of information on him because he was born in the middle to late 1870s in America. But his name is John Wesley Work Jr., and actually, the name at the bottom of your songbook, you're going to see a different name there. Yeah. It will not necessarily mean that this is a contradiction, because here we are again, right? We're at this crossroad where we have a lot of African American spirituals that were brought to life, but since they were extemporaneous, in other words, they came to life without necessarily being written down, people have interpreted them depending on who they've heard them from. So you've got groups all across, especially the southern part of America, who are singing a lot of the similar songs, and sometimes they would be laid down, but since they weren't written, well, imagine, of course, that sometimes the words would change to some degree. So the man who wrote this song, or put the words to this particular tune, is different from the one Wesley Work Jr. did, but it's all within the same context. And even though if you were to look online, you would see some slightly different words, the meaning really doesn't change. So we're going to sing one in the book while appreciating that John Wesley Work Jr. was actually the one who helped bring these to life. So let me tell you a little bit about him, where he came from and why he did that. Now remember, I just told you that he was born in 1871. How many years after the Civil War is that, right? Barely 6-7 years after the Civil War. So his context is going to be, his parents were probably part of the first group of African Americans that were set free. So imagine you're a young child in a family that's had this really difficult experience, and suddenly you're set free. The chains come off, literally and figuratively, and now your parents are relaying to you what life used to be like. So you can appreciate where they came from. And isn't that something that every parent does anyway? We want our children to know our experience to some degree. We share with them. Before Mark came back to America, I was telling my children what life was like to live here so that they could bridge the gap. I'm not 100% Japanese, but it was important for me, even before I moved back to America, for me to share that experience with my kids. You have the same thing. Even though obviously most of you have probably grown up completely in America, your kids' life, GZ generation, whatever that is, and baby boomers, is that what it's called? Is quite different. And so explaining, many of you that might have come up, if maybe the second generation after the World War II, is going to be much different than this generation that's probably never even picked up a gun. And so there's a lot of bridging that goes on here. So John Wesley Work Jr. was most likely born on August 6, 1871 in Nashville, Tennessee. He attended a university called Fisk University in Nashville, where he studied Latin and history. Imagine that. You know what I just told you about these songs, right? They weren't written down. And why weren't they written down primarily during that time period? Because the African Americans were not allowed to be educated. And now, one generation after that, look how much it accelerates. Here is a young man from that experience being allowed to study Latin and history. Not only that, he was singing in the Mozart Society while at school. And while he was doing that, that's where it sparked an interest in his African American spirituals. Following graduation, Work went on to teach for a year, studying for 1 year at Harvard University and a year as a library assistant at Fisk University. In 1898, he received a master's degree from Fisk and took an appointment as a Latin and Greek instructor. While teaching, Work became a leader in the movement to preserve, study, and perform African American spirituals. With the help of his brother, Work collected, harmonized, and published a number of collections of slave songs and spirituals. One of those was Go Tell It on the Mountains. Wow. Imagine that. One generation removed. I wish my kids would be so excited about where I came from. They would write a book or do some research. Don't you sometimes have trouble motivating our kids to even want to sit down and let us talk about our parents or our grandparents? I'm appreciative of this man who understood where he came from a degree that's so much that he wanted to appreciate. He researched it. These songs that were never really written down. He interviewed people. He talked to others. He listened to songs. And he started coordinating these. And even though he didn't create the songs, he certainly put many of those in an organized manner that we can enjoy. So this makes me think of this verse in the Bible. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. I don't think Paul was necessarily referencing a slave experience, but I think this works very well when he says teach and admonish one another. Songs can be used to do that. If you listen to the context of what Paul's saying, he's saying some teaching can be done well from the pulpit. But there's other teaching that, to be honest, sometimes can be done even better when it's put to the tune of a song. Next, I'd like to share with you this group here. These are the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Now, why are they important? Let me tell you about them. Well, spirituals were starting, Mr. Work put these together for a while, but they started to lose focus again. They were starting to get lost. And here's what we learned about this group. The performance of spirituals was given a rebirth when a group of students from newly founded Fisk University of Nashville, Tennessee began to tour in an effort to raise money for the financially strapped school. The Fisk Jubilee Singers not only carried spirituals to parts of the United States that had previously never heard African American folk songs, the musically trained chorus performed before royalty during their tours of Europe in the late 1800s. The success of the Fisk Jubilee Singers encouraged other black colleges to form touring groups. Professional Jubilee singers also toured successfully around the world. Collections of plantation songs were published to meet the public demand because they were so popular. Wow. Actual faces, again, of people whose parents had had such a difficult experience. And now they get to sing about it. Bring those to life.
Amen.
Ephesians 5:19. Paul again tells us, when using songs, that we are to speak to one another sometimes in tunes. These songs and hymns, and in this neat phrase, spiritual songs. And we are to sing and make music in our hearts to the Lord. That's what these Jubilee singers were doing. Not only were they bringing to life their parents' experience and their ancestors' experience, they were also blending that with an appreciation for God and the struggle within that. And I think that's why we enjoy so many of these songs, and they touch our heart because, to be honest, I don't know that I've ever struggled in life as a slave has. I think I've had some pretty difficult experiences, but I honestly don't ever think that my experience is probably got as rough as it was for some of them. So when I sing some of these African American spirituals, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, I know that there's even a person out there who has had that experience on a different level than I did, but yet I can take that song and I can lay it on the experience that I've had, and I can experience where I'm at even if I haven't had it to that degree.
Amen. Amen.
The last picture I'd like to share with you are these three. As you see there on the picture, it says, this is an actual picture, which is why there's writing around it. It's really old. These are two pioneers of the African American spiritual art song. And just so in case you know these people, there's the composer and baritone named H.T. Burleigh that's on the left, the tenor and composer Roland Hayes, and then he's on the right, and then Jenny A. Robinson, who's there in the middle. They were teachers and composers of music that helped bring many of these songs to life. 1 Corinthians 14:15. You may be saying, Mark, what is the point of all this? I think Paul again says that. What is the conclusion then? He wants us to know this. When we pray, we need to pray with the Spirit.
Yes.
So that we can also pray with understanding. But don't miss this. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will also sing with understanding. If you were to ask me to give you a verse why Mark is doing this series, it's for this reason. I'm concerned that many in our audience, including myself, have sometimes sung songs hollowly. We have lost the feeling. We've lost the meaning of it. So we're trying to bring this to life. And how even more so important tonight do the words of Paul, when we need to appreciate the depth of struggle that many of these songs bring to life. And as we sing these songs in the future, I'm hoping you'll have a new, respect and understanding for where they came from. We finished tonight in Luke chapter 2, verses 8 through 17. Before we sing all three verses of this song. This is where also we might say this song is telling us a story of. As in a lot of our songs, they tell a story, and this one does too. It starts with the birth of Christ. And to put this in context, we're going to read a part of that, and then we will sing the three songs. Three verses of the song. So starting with verse 8. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And by the way, perhaps that's the go tell it on the mountain part, right? And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. All right. go to page 976 once again. And before we sing, as we do each week, I'd like for you to listen to the words of the song, to appreciate it, as Paul was said, so we can sing with understanding. And now with the backdrop of the African-American experience and struggle that they had in these songs coming to life for us from that experience, let's think about them. Starts off, as you know, go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The shepherds all were watching while seated on the ground. A light from heaven descended and glory shone around. This light shone in the heavens to cover all the earth. It was a sign to tell men about our Savior's birth. The wise men came to worship the holy child that day. They found him in a manger, sleeping on the hay. Well, let's sing in the Spirit with the knowledge of understanding. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The shepherds all were watching while seated on the ground. A light from heaven descended and glory shone around. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. This light shone in the heavens to cover all the earth. It was a sign to tell men about our Savior's birth. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The wise men came to worship the holy child that day. They found him in a manger, sleeping on the hay. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. All right. I hope tonight you have appreciated a little bit, even more so than before, where some of these songs have come from. We want to go and tell it on the mountain, don't we? In fact, I bet we even want to go tell it in the valley, don't we? We're going to go tell it everywhere. I hope tonight excites you, this message that we bring forth, the greatest news, and if anything, our world needs it even more so in our present environment. Tomorrow, walk out. Instead of talking about this thing called Corona or toilet paper, why don't we talk about Christ and what He brings to the world? What a greater message that has that gives people a sense of peace. Just like the angels were told some 2,000 years ago, and many slaves had to think and pray for peace in a time when they were going through suffering on themselves. As we look at these songs today, we have our own experience of suffering that we work through and have a great appreciation for that. So tonight, is there someone in our audience who has suffering, someone who needs peace, which Jesus Christ brings? Rest assured, He is the Prince of Peace. So tonight, if you're in need of that, if you need that peace brought to you, please come forward now as we stand and sing.